Well, hi, Rebecca. I'm Lori. Thank you for joining me. I know that you're joining me from Michigan, which is an area of the country that's had a severe winter storm and power outage, and we're having some spotty internet. So hopefully we can get through this interview without too many problems. And I'm coming at you from an animal sanctuary, so you may hear various animal noises in the background. So I understand that you did some research into dogs and how they can adapt their bodies, whether physiologically or behaviorally, to deal with extreme heat or extreme cold. So tell me a little bit about the physiological responses that dogs have to maintain homeostasis during hot and cold circumstances.
Okay. So in the heat, their main way of cooling is panting, which helps evaporate water from their nose, mouth, and throat. And that helps cool them down. The heat from the water escapes, and then they breathe in the cool air, and that cools their body temperature down. And that's their main way of cooling. It's kind of like how humans sweat, but dogs don't have sweat glands. So that's kind of their version of sweating. And then for cool weather, dogs will shiver just like humans would. They shiver, kind of involuntary muscle contraction and relaxation produces heat, helps heat up the body. And then they also will have a pilomotor response. So muscles in the skin will raise their hairs to help trap heat closer to the surface of their body to help increase their body temperature as well.
Okay, great. So I thought of another question when I was listening to you go through those. And you said that dogs don't sweat. So they don't sweat at all through any part of their body, or are there parts of their body where they can dissipate heat through evaporative cooling?
So the panting is their main form of evaporative cooling. They do have a few sweat glands in their paw pads, but they're not actually for cooling. They use it for traction. So because they're small, so it doesn't actually have any cooling effect or anything. But those are really the only sweat glands that they have.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. So when it comes to puppies, or whether they're newborn or they're a little bit older, but still with their litter mate and mom, how do puppies thermoregulate? Is it the same as adult dogs, or do they have other ways that they stay cool or warm?
So with puppies, they actually don't have the ability for a whole lot of thermoregulation. They can't shiver or have like the vasoconstriction that adult dogs would do until they're about like 6 to 8 days old. So for the first few days, it's mostly like behavioral responses that they use. They'll huddle together with other puppies. They learn to respond to their mom when she calls out so that the mom can find them, warm them up. And then they also will increase their food consumption to help kind of counteract the energy cost of trying to warm themselves up. And then they also will use certain body postures. They'll curl up in a ball to reduce the amount of surface area and kind of conserve body heat that way.
Okay. So that's interesting. And that makes a lot of sense. So if they make themselves smaller, they're losing less heat to the environment. When they call out to mom, because I'm assuming mom leaves them for periods of time and then has to come back to nurse them. But there's other times apparently that they would call or whine to get mom's attention. And that has to do with being too hot or too cold. And then mom, how does she respond to that?
So usually she'll come over, and if it's too cold, if they like separated, she'll pick them up and bring them back to the group, or herself warm them. I'm not sure how she would cool them. It's mostly for keeping them warm is what she would do, because actually hypothermia is one of the leading causes of death in newborn puppies. So being too cold is the main issue. So usually it's just getting mom over to kind of warm them back up.
Okay. Now, would there be any times when she would move the puppies maybe to like a cooler or warmer spot, or is it mostly she just takes care of them wherever they happen to be?
I think really that would kind of depend on like how big they are, but usually I would imagine she would move them to, if it's too cold in the area that she's in or the puppies were in, I would imagine she would move them to warmer areas or cooler areas to kind of help them, since they can't thermoregulate themselves. I think she would help move them that way.
Thank you. That gave me a lot of information. Now, I understand that you have some questions for me about an animal that I was studying a little bit, and that was the cheetah.
Yeah, so yeah, kind of the same along the same line. So I know cheetahs are kind of in a hot environment. How do they typically keep themselves hot or cool in that type of an environment?
Yeah, so cheetahs are native to Africa, and they inhabit the grasslands there where it tends to stay very hot. In fact, the coolest that it would get probably is down into the 60s degrees Fahrenheit. So they really are not adapted for cold temperatures. And if they found themselves in cold temperatures, for example, if they find themselves in those temperatures that dip down into the 60s, which doesn't sound very cold to us, but would be on the cold range for a cheetah, they have a thin hair coat. So their hair coat doesn't do a very good job of keeping them warm, but they can piloerect their hair coat and insulate themselves somewhat, but not to the extent that a dog or other animal adapted to the cold would. And so when it gets that cold, what they really need to do is behaviorally relocate themselves to a warmer area, but they can also reduce their activity level so that they're not expending as much energy on things like hunting and prey acquisition and moving around, and they can spend more of their energy to self-generate heat. And just as with the dogs, they can get their bodies smaller and wrap into a ball to help conserve heat as well. And they do have the ability to vasoconstrict in their extremities and in their ears. And that means that the vessels in those areas either get bigger, vasodilation, to dissipate heat, which is one of the ways that the cheetah stays cool. They're able to vasodilate, and it dissipates heat from their vessels. They can also vasoconstrict to an extent, and they can conserve heat. And so that's another way that they would stay warm when it's very, very cold. But they're much more adapted to live in the heat. And so their bodies are really structured to dissipate as much heat as possible because they can get over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in their habitat. And so they dissipate heat through panting, or evaporative cooling through panting, just like dogs do. And then they vasodilate in areas that are close to the skin surface, like their ears. And then they have the ability to vasodilate the vessels in their legs so that their feet and legs don't overheat. And that just dissipates more heat away from the body instead of conserving it. But they also have a countercurrent heat exchange system, primarily in the extremities, which is their legs. And so the arteries that are bringing blood from the heart to the extremities has really warm blood. And the veins that take blood away from the extremities back to the heart and lungs has cooler blood. And these vessels are so close together that there's a heat exchange between them, and it sort of evens out the heat in the legs and feet. So instead of the blood in those areas being super hot or super cold, it's kind of a moderate temperature, and it sort of maintains itself because of this countercurrent heat exchange system. But they will also behaviorally adapt to the heat by moving to shade, by finding cooler spots near water, or they will lay in cooler dirt. But so they'll find cooler areas out of the direct sunlight to remain cooler from.
Wow, that's a lot of great information. So you mentioned they do a lot of behavioral. Do they ever like adjust like during the specific times of day when they would go and hunt, or like hunt more at night to try to avoid hot times? Or
that's a really logical question. And I initially figured that maybe they would be nocturnal because it would be cooler at night. And it's actually not the case. They're active during the day, and they actively hunt during the day. And I presume, although I didn't research specifically prey acquisition behavior, that it's probably because their prey is more active during the day, moving around, grazing during the day, and more visible and easy to find during the day. So they do move around and are active during the day, and that is when they primarily hunt. But if it becomes too extremely hot, they will not hunt and they will find shade in order to retreat to until the temperature is a little more optimal for them to move around in. They also have a really great ability to conserve water because they're evaporating a lot of heat off of their body through evaporative cooling, and water can be scarce there in the African savanna. So they can actually go several days without water. They have a really good system of taking as much water from their food and from what they drink as possible and conserving it within their body so that they're not constantly having to drink every few hours or even every day.
I didn't even think about that with not having water. That's really cool that they can do that. And what about I don't know what baby cheetahs are called. Are they?
They're called cubs.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I call them really, really cute, but they're called cubs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. They cannot thermoregulate the way that adult cheetahs can. And so a lot of the thermoregulation depends on mom. And so if it gets cool, and remember in their environment, cool is in the 60s and we're talking in Fahrenheit. So, if it gets down to 68, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, that is cool for this species. And so if it gets down to those temperatures, mom needs to keep those cubs warm. So the cubs, they don't have a full hair coat. Their body is not fully generating the heat that an adult cheetah could in cold temperatures. So mom really has to keep them warm. So not only will the babies huddle together with each other, but mom will huddle close to them and warm the babies with her own body. As her body generates heat, it's keeping the babies warm. And conversely, if it's too hot, mom will actually move the cheetah cubs to shade. So if the babies are out in the sun, or if the area where they are gets too hot, she will individually pick them up by the nape of the neck and move them to another location. And when they get old enough, then they will follow her to other locations where it's more well shaded. All of these physiologic adaptations sort of develop as the cubs reach 8, 10, 12 weeks old and adolescence.
Don't the babies have like a special or like a specific hair coat or like something around like their neck or something like that?
So the cubs have,
I might be thinking of the wrong thing.
Well, cubs will have thicker hair around the neck, like called a ruff. So they're just gonna have fuzzy or furry hair sticking out around the neck, but they're not gonna have a fully developed hair coat like an adult cheetah would. And an adult cheetah's hair coat is really more designed to keep them cool and insulate them from heat and dissipate heat rather than keep them warm. They have very thin skin so that the body is able to dissipate more heat into the environment. And their hair coat is pretty thin so that more heat can be dissipated into the environment. The hair coat can protect them from like direct sun on their skin, but it really is not going to insulate them if it drops below, 65, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So if they found themselves in an extreme cold situation, like for some reason, the African savanna dropped below freezing, cheetahs would really not have the potential to survive freezing temperatures because they don't have the hair coat to do that.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. They wouldn't have the thick fur like a dog or something would. Yeah.
Well, Rebecca, I really appreciate you joining me for this co-interview, and hopefully by educating people a little bit about dogs and cheetahs and how they thermoregulate, whether they're cold or hot, it helps them move forward in life with a little bit more knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for all your information. You had a lot of great information that I didn't know. So I appreciate it.
No
Thank you
problem.
for taking the time. Yeah.